Hey friend. So today I want to start by painting kind of a picture for you, one that I think you'll be very familiar with. I know I was, but really this feeling of like it just being impossible to figure out where to start or how to treat PMDD. Like every option that's out there is so different and often contradictory, where it's like, go on this med, try this supplement, or like whatever you do, don't go on this med, or try this supplement, or this pill, or that thing. And this feeling of like, if I'm not perfect, if I'm not, going sugar free, caffeine free, alcohol free, working out every day, taking all the supplements, on the perfect right combination of medications for like your biological chemistry, if you're not zened out all the time, then things are going to be awful. And if you do all of those things, you might have a decent, okay, maybe PMDD month. And the amount of like stress of that, of trying to maintain all of those things, and the amount of like pressure you put on yourself if you don't stick to that perfect plan. If PMDD hits and you're just like, I don't have the energy to actually maintain all of this stuff. And so, of course, my PMDD is going to flare, it's going to be awful, and kind of that doom spiral. This was me probably like 4 years ago, where I was literally still in this space of throwing everything that I could find or read about at the PMDD problem. And it wasn't working. And I was almost like trying things from this mentality of like, because you have people who are like, oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? Or have you tried that? And there was a part of me that was connected enough to like my body and my intuition to just be like, that's not it for me. Like, that's not going to be the magic pill for me. But obviously, like, I didn't have any evidence. I didn't really know what that feeling was or how to communicate that. So when people would tell me, like, oh, try this, try that, there was this almost this element of like, if I try this, then at least I can tell them that I tried it. And like, that's why I know it's not going to work for me. And it just was true in so many instances. Like, I cut out dairy, I cut out gluten, I cut out alcohol, like I did so many things and was then so pissed off when my PMDD was back, and sometimes worse than when I was on those things. And I was so incredibly frustrated with this process. And when things started to actually shift and change for me, and as I think about like if I were starting over, knowing what I know now, like what would actually be that first line for me? What would be the first steps that I would take? What would I be prioritizing? And that's what I want to share with you today is that if I could go back, I would have put so many things on the back burner. Like I was leading with like diet, supplements, tracking, like all these like very practical things, and things that are helpful, are a part of the journey, that have then weaved themselves back into my process. But what I found is that when I was leading with all of these things that I should do that were on lists that people recommended, I was doing things to my body. And I didn't even have really the connection to myself to gauge, do these things feel good? And I was still in this mindset of like, if this isn't working for me, that must mean there's something like extra wrong with me, or like what's so wrong with me that something that worked for someone else is not working for me. And so, what really shifted for me and started to make the biggest difference was going to a approach in a perspective of, I need to connect with my body first. I need to learn to be present with my experience, present with my feelings, present with PMDD, and get to this place of embodiment so that I have access to that intuition and the confidence to trust it, that like, oh, this is the right kind of direction to go in at this moment in time. Because if you're doing all of these things, like this is pressure, this is stress, this is so overwhelming that you're not living, you're not in these moments, right? And everything is through this lens of like, what does PMDD allow me to do? And so, what I want to kind of introduce today is this other approach of like, what if instead of leading with all these shoulds and these things that you can be doing to your body, that you actually partner with it? Now, this is much easier said than done, and I get that. this is a practice of kind of being in present in our experience that I still come back to this lesson. This is one that is ongoing. I definitely haven't mastered it, and I don't really know that this is a lesson that you master. I think it's something that you're constantly uncovering new layers of learning to be present with the discomfort of what's going on in your life at that time. And so I want to acknowledge that like I'm not saying this is like, oh, this is the quickest way, or this is the magic pill if you just do this. But there's something so different about being present enough in your body to know that, like, okay, I took the supplement and I know that worked for me or didn't work for me. Or shifting from this perspective of like, I need to work out every day, to a vibe of like, how does my body want to move? And actually being connected enough to know the answer to that. Because I'll say for me, I'm someone who is like classically sedentary person. And for so long, I was like, yeah, my body doesn't tell me that. Like, I could sit in one place for like hours and not even get any sort of nudge of like, oh, maybe we should move around. Maybe we should, walk the block or like do something like that for so long. But when I started to actually be present in my body, I started to actually hear these signals from myself of being like, oh, like going and stepping out in the sun would feel good. Going on a bike ride would feel good. Like, it started to shift where it's like I was so disconnected that anything my body wanted to tell me that was good and nourishing and helpful wasn't connecting. For food, it was like I was, reacting of like, okay, my blood sugar's low. So what does my brain want? My brain wants sugar. It wants carbs. It wants that quick hit. And then when I got embodied and was present and it felt safe in my body, I start to get nudges of like, oh, why am I craving kale? Why is that something I'm craving? And it's like, oh, I just finished my period. And what does kale have? It's really high in iron, and it's really high in vitamin C, which helps you absorb iron. And it was literally my body telling me like, this is what you need, and being able to fully trust that, because it's not saying you need Oreos. Like, obviously we don't need Oreos. That doesn't mean we can't enjoy Oreos and have a treat and like be present for that experience either. But there's just something different of when we're present and navigating all of these different possible treatments and navigating like, who's the right person to work with, what resonates with my experience. Like, all of those questions become so much easier to answer when we're in our body. So let's talk about like, how do we even do that? So I think the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge that when you've been living with chronic emotional dysregulation, emotional distress, and all of these symptoms wrapped up in PMDD for so long, that this idea of being embodied, the biggest hurdle to that is that we don't feel safe in our bodies. Dropping into our bodies, checking in with ourselves, having moments of quiet, those things don't feel safe, right? And that's like the biggest thing, is how do we create that safety for ourselves? And I really believe that so much of the intensity around PMDD, around the intensity of like the depression, the anxiety, the anger, the shutdown, like the oppressive feeling of PMDD is really linked to our fear to be present with the experience, even the negative stuff, even the hard stuff, even the discomfort. And the reality is that the more that we fight those feelings, the more that we resist the discomfort, the bigger and more out of control that it starts to feel. And so the first step here is really, once we acknowledge that and recognize that, like, there's not something that's so wrong with us. Like, it's not that we're incapable of being embodied in all of these things. It's just that we're starting from a place where it feels so unsafe to be in our bodies. So that's what we're needing to acknowledge. And then the second thing here is that we have to actually believe and trust that the way out is really through, right? The more that we're trying to avoid it or get around it or suppress it or, feel like this is a burden on others, so we're trying to just keep it all close to the chest, we're, doing that whole dance, like, that's when it gets out of control. That's when it gets overwhelming for us. That's when it feels all consuming and like we're just doing things and we're watching ourselves act in ways that we wish we weren't but we can't stop it. Okay. But the way out of PMDD, the way out of the pain is through it, is being present in our bodies. And I will say, like, when those feelings are intense though, and we haven't been taught how to tolerate that, how to be with that experience, because we haven't, right? We were not gentle parented, right? We weren't allowed to have any sort of like free expression where it was safe to be angry. It was safe to be sad. It was safe to be upset. It was safe to be frustrated, right? We didn't grow up in these environments. And so when we experience that as adults, we want to shut that down. And the way that we do that is by dissociating. And we get so good at escaping it. I know I did, where like that protective mechanism of disassociating was so fast that I could separate, right, this experience that I was having, and I could break it down for someone. I could explain to them what was going on. I could explain to them hard things, and it kind of gets separated. Now, that's one version. And then there was the version of like, I'm fully in the feelings and they're overwhelming me and like, I can't find my way out of it. Or I'm completely separate from it and I'm breaking it down in a very like factual, like detached kind of way. I'll never forget when someone reflected that experience back to me for the first time. I was in my certification program and someone in my cohort, we were doing kind of a group practice, and it was my turn to share and other people to kind of do active listening and sort of reflect things back. And she was commenting on, she's like, I've always like impressed by your ability to share kind of like hard things, emotionally heavy things in such a like calm way. Like you don't cry, you don't like, have these emotional reactions. Like it's so calm and like almost factual. But at the same time, she's like, but I see that. And I also feel like there's like something to acknowledge there of like, without that expression of emotion, it must be really hard to feel seen and heard and get support from people because you seem fine. And it really struck me because it was like, this is so true. Like, it's like, if you happen to be there in the moment I'm having a meltdown, like, yeah, you're getting all the feelings. But outside of that meltdown moment, it was like, I couldn't show it. I had so many, walls there. And so, yes, people who lived in my home with me saw those meltdowns and saw the extent of it, but everyone else in my life only saw the version that I showed them, right? And so as I talked more with her, she was like, we're having these questions of like, where do you feel it? Where is that going? And it's like, I was feeling all of this pressure and tightness and stuff in my chest. And I was like, and then what happens is it immediately goes to my brain where I try to name it and label it and almost like, oh, here's this experience that's outside of me and I'm going to figure it out. And, if I can explain it, then it's fine, right? I can kind of make sense of it that way. And then if that's too overwhelming, it's like, that's when I escape. That's when I'm scrolling or reading or like anything else but being in my body in that moment. And she brought up this point of like, have you ever tried to move that energy that you're feeling here in your chest, like down into your womb space? And that was at a point too where I was like, oh, I've never done any womb work like that. I don't know how I feel about that woo-ness. But that kind of just stuck with me. And it was essentially this concept of like, have you ever tried taking that nervous system response and instead of it being something that's controlling me and has a grip on me, like dropping into my body and have that be an experience that I'm holding for myself? And I was just like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to get from here to like in my body. And again, like I said, that pathway to my brain and then disassociating was so fast at times that I wouldn't even realize. I would like catch myself scrolling or doing something else and be like, oh, whoa, like I was trying to feel a feeling and I'm already somewhere else and I don't know how that happened. And so it's a process for sure, but some of the questions that helped me to really start dropping into my body and feeling that difference and creating some tolerance for it, connecting to it, because this is a process of like even a few seconds a day, right, is something that we can build on that capacity. So some of the questions that were helpful were, one, to ask me, like, where are the sensations? Where am I feeling it in my body? What does it feel like? And I know I've shared this before, but so often we think like the thoughts are driving things, but it's not. It's what's happening in our body. So our body is picking something up in our environment, or is triggered by something that's like, triggering a core belief of ours, and our body responds, our nervous system responds. And then it becomes thoughts, then it becomes stories and explanations and predictions and all of those things. And so coming back to the body experience is going to bypass that negative and dissociative like thought spiral. So asking, where is that sensation in my body? What's happening? Is it in my chest? Is it in my throat? Is it in my hands? Am I clenching? Is there tightness and restriction? Am I, curling in on myself? Am I leaning back from someone? Like, what is happening in my body? And then asking, like, what's the story? Like, what are the thoughts that my brain is telling me? What is the pattern that my brain's saying? Because essentially, when we have these physiological responses, our brain is going to tell us and predict that it will turn out the way that it's turned out in the past when we've had those feelings, right? And so understanding, like, what are the patterns there? Asking, like, what's the feeling? Because so often we get trapped in our nervous system response. We're lashing out of that fight response. We're trying to escape out of this flight response, or we're shutting down out of that freeze response. And when we actually drop that into our body, what happens is we're able to see, like, okay, here's all the thoughts and the anger and the surface stuff happening, but what's underneath, right? What's the inner child or the shadow wound or things that's being triggered here? Is it grief? Is it pain? Is it neglect? Is it rejection? Is it not feeling good enough? Like, what is underneath those reactive responses? This is how we start to kind of find this pathway back to what's going on in our bodies. And I really see this as like a feeling our feelings, being with the experience of PMDD is a meditative practice. The same way that if we're trying to meditate and it's like you're supposed to allow your thoughts to come and just be there, but not to follow them, not to like, it's just to be with whatever is and let it exist, right? This is the same when we're being in our bodies, is we're trying to notice at what point does this feel so uncomfortable that I want to do something else? What do I grab onto when I'm escaping the feeling, right? This is how we start to explore, like, what does this progress look like? What does it look like to go from, I can't eat, like, I can't stand any of it, to like, oh, I could hold that experience for maybe like 30 seconds before I grabbed my phone, or before I had to get up and move or do something, right? Before my brain took me into a different space. And just this practice of bringing yourself back to the present moment. And the beauty of this is, like, this doesn't just have to be a practice with negative emotions. We also get to practice this with good emotions. Like when you're feeling happy, when you're feeling loved, when you're feeling any moment of support or any good day, like, can you drop into your body and name, where is that feeling? Is it warmth, like around your heart space? Is it like happy butterfly kind of feelings, excitement in your stomach? Like, where is that in your body? And can you be present with it? And I think you'll find that you probably disassociate from that as well, of like your capacity to feel good is also limited based on these barriers that we put on feeling our experience and being present with it. But we get to play around with it in both directions. Now, with that said, I think a lot of times when we're talking about this like embodiment or somatic work, it's like, okay, we're just going to be present with it. We're going to be in our bodies. We're going to do all of those things. But if you're trying to go and just be still and be in your body when it does not feel safe, when it's the furthest thing from a safe place for you, and you don't have any tools to support you in that, like, it can be re-traumatizing. It can feel so incredibly painful that it can reinforce that pattern of escaping and disassociating. So next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing a video on the kind of baby step entry points to nervous system regulation, because you do have to build out a toolbox of regulating your nervous system to build up this tolerance, to continue to create space. It's sort of the pathway to starting to drop into your body and to have the confidence and the self-trust that you can withstand it, even if it's for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. And as you expand that, right, like that's obviously the goal, but we need these tools to support us. And the reason that I, share this is, and consider this to be of like, this is like first step kind of stuff, because this is the process that really shifted me from being completely disassociated and disconnected from my body, where I couldn't answer questions of like, what feels aligned, what feels good, what's resonating, like, what is that intuitive nudge, or like, trust your gut, like all of those things. I could not access any of that, to actually feeling at like a deep, like soul level, that it was safe to be in my body. And this really was something that like fully clicked in and was unlocked for me like this year. Okay. That unlocked this PMDD free experience for me, where I'm no longer thinking about life from this space of what does PMDD allow me to do? It's no longer PMDD management. It's like, what do I want to do? And yes, I know I have my tools and my support and things to help me navigate unexpected things that didn't go the way I wanted them to or expected them to, and to trust that if I go and try something new and I don't like it, it's because I actually don't like it, and not because PMDD kept me from being able to enjoy it or be present for it. And so it was really like this embodiment work that led me to some very distinct experiences where I actually felt safe in my body. And we have to come back to this. And this is key stuff. And like, yes, as we go along this journey, we start asking these questions of like, what food is going to feel good and feel nourishing for our body, and what movement is going to feel good. But that should come from this place of connection from our body and not be the thing that we're doing to our body. So definitely keep a lookout for next week's email, where I'm going to be sharing a lot of practical ways that you can start this process. And if you're listening to this and then you listen to next week's video and you're like, I don't think I can DIY that. I don't have the capacity. Work is busy, life is busy, relationships are busy. Like, I need space to be held and guided through this process. That's why I'm building out this group program. I will link the waitlist for you to get on. I have a handful of people on that waitlist already, and I'm just waiting to get a couple more people on there before I kind of launch the beta round of this. But that is what this program is going to be about. It's really, how do we connect back to our bodies, and how do we use our cycles as a way to do that? How do we, work with our nervous systems as a way to do that? And let me just say from personal experience that having that space held for you, having a coach to guide you, having someone to really like lend their nervous system and create some co-regulation and safety in that process is so powerful and creates so much opportunity for transformation. I literally just wrapped up a coaching program that I was a participant in, and it was 100% like the right person, the right program at the right time. But I have never felt held like that before. I have never had a coaching experience be that transformative either. And so the power of having someone in your corner supporting you when it's a good fit and all of those things is so incredibly powerful. So again, I'm going to drop that wait list for you because I know how hard this stuff is to do on your own. And even the times where I've been the most invested in this journey of DIYing it for myself, it's not like, oh, like I have some like magic superpowers and I was able to DIY it and that makes me somehow better or more equipped or anything. Honestly, it comes back to privilege of I had seasons in my life where I had the kind of flexibility and time and things to make this a priority and make this top of the list. And I know for most people and in most seasons of life, like that's not realistic, right? Like there's jobs, there's relationships, there's kids, there's like real life adulting stuff that has to happen. And so making PMDD like your primary focus of like, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to do this, isn't always accessible. And so if you have the time and the space and you're like, I I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to do it myself. Like, I hope all of the things I've shared today and that I'll share next week, and, you know, as I share in all my videos, will help you to like have a path and do that. But if you're like, I feel so overwhelmed at the thought of engaging in this process, like I can't even begin to figure out how I'm going to do that. Like, I hear you, I see you, and I've created a space to support you. And I would absolutely be so honored to guide you in that process if you feel like it's the right time and right fit.